Okay, so last week we had a look at drawing some shapes. I think we might have even had a look at iterations. Don't totally remember, but what I want to talk to you about now is using variables. And we're going to keep with basic simple shapes and use variables with them. So I'm on the P5JS web editor. I've got just a brand new sketch here. I haven't changed anything. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off by drawing a rectangle. If you remember, we looked at using shapes last week, so I can type rect to draw the rectangle, and then I put its parameters in here. And the first parameters are the x and y value of the top left corner. And for now, I'm just going to go 0 and 0. And then the width and height of my rectangle. And I'm going to have a square, and it's going to be 100 by 100. Okay, so what happens now? Let's play, and here we go. Here's my square in the top left-hand corner. Let's give it a color, and just to refresh your memory, you can use the fill command to give it a color. If you type in just one value here, it's going to use a grayscale value, and that always the color numbers go from 0 to 255. That's how we talk about color. If I wanted to have a color that was outside of grayscale, I could use RGB values, and so I could type in 255, 0, 0, which is red, so it's full red, no green, and no blue. I could play with that a bit. I'm just going to type 100 in here and see how that looks. There we go. I've got like a nice orange. I also don't think I want this stroke around the outside, so I'm going to use a command called no stroke. Notice that the S here is capitalized. And there's no value that I have to put in no stroke, but I do need to include these brackets after it. Just to note, if I don't, you'll see it doesn't work. I'm not actually getting an error here, but it has underlined it. And when I hover over that, I can see that it expected an assignment or function call. All of these different commands are functions. And without the brackets, it's not a function, so it doesn't really know what to do here. So there we go. Likewise, if I was to put a small s here, you'll see I get an error message, no stroke is not defined. That means the program doesn't know what no stroke is. And it actually catches me here and says, we think you've written no stroke instead of no stroke with the capitals. It also tells me the line where the error is, so I can go down to line number 8. And I can also tell again by the fact that this isn't bold like the rest of them. So I'll just change this back to stroke. There we go. So now I've got this nice pretty orange rectangle in the top left corner here. Alrighty. So what are variables? So variables let you store, modify, and reuse your data throughout the program. They store a value in memory, and so that you can use it throughout your program, and you can use it and you can change it. You can use it over and over again. And variables are useful for so many reasons. They're much more efficient with your programming, but they also allow for greater expression because you can have a value that you can control over time. And this is where variables really come into their own. It's also useful in the future for user interaction and all sorts of things. So, how do we create a variable? You create a variable by declaring it, and we're going to declare this at the top of our program before function setup. Declaring it outside of function setup or function draw means that I can access it anywhere within the program. That means it would work if I used it in function setup, and it would also work if I used it in draw. There are cases where you don't create it at the top. When you have it at the top like this and it's usable everywhere, that's called a global variable. But yeah, you don't always want that, but we're going to just stick with global variables for now, and we might look at other variable specifics later on. But generally, it's good to just declare it globally. So to declare it, I type the word var, and so that says I'm creating a variable. I need to put my variable name, and I'm just going to call mine x for now. And I could leave it there. That means that I've declared a variable, and that I can refer to it later on. Right now it has no value, so I'm also going to declare the value here. I'm going to say x equals 10. And just add a space so it's a bit neater to read. Move my console log down again. Okay, so that's really basic. I've got a variable called x, but I'm not called x with a value of 10, but I'm not yet using it. So now I'm going to use it in the x value here of my rectangle. So I could call my variable whatever I want. It's useful to give your variables names that are descriptive so that when you you know what your intention with the variable was. So I'm going to use this for the x value of my rectangle, and so I can just type x in here now, and yeah, there we go. It's moved my rectangle over by 10. Just to show you, if I comment out this variable, I get an error because the program's like, oh, we don't know what x is. And in program language, it says x is not defined. It tells me the line number and where the issue is. So line 11, 3, so here. And yeah, when something's not defined, it means the program doesn't know what to do with it. So either there's a typo and it doesn't know what you've written, or you're using a variable that's not declared. Okay, so that's all well and good. Maybe I can add another variable called y, and let's also give that a value of 10. And let's use that for my y value here. Okay, nice. So one of the things with variables is that you can use them over and over again, but you can also change them over time. So let's look at animating this square by changing the variable. And this isn't necessarily always how you would animate, but we're going to look at this now because I think it's a pretty good demonstration. So we've mentioned last week that the draw function, it loops. So it runs through each of these lines of code, and then it goes back to the top and starts again. And again and again, and it happens really fast. It happens 60 times per second. So if I change the value of x each time, I'll be able to move my square around. So let's, on the next line here, I'm going to, if you want to change the value of x, you don't need to use the var keyword anymore. You don't need to declare it again. You just need to give it a new value. So I can say x equals x plus 1. And you can see my square starts to move, and it keeps going, and there it goes right off the edge of the screen. We'll look at that later, but for now, that's a good example of how you can animate using these values. Okay, so another way I could write this, and probably the better way to start writing these things, is if I want to add a number to a value, I can use plus equals. So I can say x plus equals 1, and that's just going to add 1 to it each time in the loop. Okay, so just pause for a second. You can pause the video in a minute and have a play with this and have a go at trying to speed up the movement of the square. So yeah, pause and see if you can do it. It's okay if you can't. Hopefully you've paused it and had a play. So if I want to make this move at a quicker speed, I can change the value of 1 here. So I can add a larger value to it each frame. So for example, if I type in 5, there we go, zooming across the screen. Likewise, if I put a decimal number, if I go 0.2, for example, we're going to get a very slow moving square. just save this as first variable. Okay, so let's make another new file and have a look at another way of working with variables. Okay, so this time I'm going to draw a line. So you draw a line by declaring or using the line function, and the first two values are the x and y value of one side of the line, and the other two are the x and y values of the next set line. So I'm going to type in here 0 and 0, and I want this to take up my whole screen, so I'm going to type in 400 and 400. And let's see what we get. So here we go, here's my line going all the way across the screen. I'm going to make my background white, which is 255. And there we go. Maybe I'll make an X and I'll draw a line the other way as well. So I'll draw a second line, and I'll start this one at 0 x value, no, 400 x value. Think about that for a second, and 0, and then the bottom value I want to be 0 and 400. And here we go. So I've got this X drawn. So there are global variables included in P5.js, and these are variables that are written into the program that are available for you to use. Two of these that are particularly useful are width and height. So width and height are going to tell you whatever width and height you have set here. So when you set these values, you're also setting a variable called width and a variable called height. And let's look at how this works. So instead of, so the built-in variables for P5.js you don't need to declare, they already exist. So instead of my width and height here, I could type in width, instead of manually typing it, and height. So there you go, nothing changes, it's still in the right position, so that's great. And same here, I'm going to type in a width, and this second one's referring to the height, so I'll say height. Width. Okay, great, but I mean, why would I do that instead of just typing 400? And so one of the great things about this is because it's dynamic, if I change the value of create canvas, the width and height in there, it's also going to update my width and height variables. So let's see this in action. I'm going to make my canvas 600 by, there you go, 900. Whoop. And you can see as I change these sizes, my lines stick to the corners, so I keep this X kind of shape. Let's just say 600 by 600. There we go. So that's one use of using width and height. They're dynamic, so that they change whenever the code they're referring to changes.